There are moments when connection stops feeling like something that's happening between two people and starts feeling like something that was already waiting to happen long before either person recognized it. I didn't believe in that before you, not because I thought people were incapable of understanding each other deeply, but because I understood how rare true recognition actually is. Most people don't see each other. They see fragments, reactions, reflections of their own expectations projected onto whoever stands in front of them. That's how almost every interaction works. People translate each other into something easier to process, simpler, safer, less precise, and for most of my life, I learned how to survive inside that system without ever fully belonging to it. I became good at remaining partially unreadable, not invisible, just carefully unfinished. I let people understand enough to interact with me, but never enough to reach the center of anything real. That distance became instinctive after a while, automatic, like breathing, not because I was hiding something dramatic, but because I understood what happens when people misinterpret depth they can't carry correctly. They reshape it, distort it, reduce it into something that fits inside their own emotional framework. And once that happens, you stop existing accurately inside their mind. You become an idea instead of a person. I refused to become an idea for anyone. So I stayed careful, measured, controlled. Every thought filtered before it became language. Every silence intentional. Every layer placed exactly where I wanted it. It worked. Until you. You never approached me the way others did. You never demanded explanation. Never searched for weak points. Never tried to decode me like I was some puzzle waiting to reward curiosity. You simply paid attention. And there's something deeply unsettling about being observed by someone who doesn't need answers to understand you. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was coincidence, thought recognition, projection. A temporary sense of familiarity caused by timing or circumstance. But then it kept happening. You would notice things before I spoke them. Respond to shifts in tone no one else detected. Understand pauses that should have looked empty from the outside. You reacted to meaning instead of language. That's what made it different. Most people listen to words. You listen to structure, to what existed underneath the words. And once I realized that, something in me became unsteady in a way I wasn't prepared for, not emotionally, structurally. Because you weren't interacting with the version of me I presented outwardly. You were interacting with the version I usually keep internal. Like you bypassed the entire surface without trying. That shouldn't happen. People aren't supposed to reach that level accidentally. It usually takes years, conflict, history, repeated exposure, slow trust. But with you, none of that existed. There was no process. No gradual transition from stranger to familiarity. You entered my awareness, already carrying a kind of recognition that felt disturbingly complete. And I still don't fully understand how. Sometimes I replay small moments in my head, trying to identify where the shift actually began. But there isn't one clear point. No dramatic event. No defining conversation. Just accumulation. 1,000 subtle moments aligning too perfectly to dismiss. The way your silence never felt uncomfortable. The way you never rushed me toward clarity. The way you understood when not speaking carried more truth than speaking ever could. Most people panic inside silence. They try to fix it immediately, fill it, shush it, control it before it becomes too revealing. You never did that. You allowed silence to exist naturally, and because of that, it became heavier between us, more honest. Like every unspoken thing gained weight, simply because neither of us forced it into language too quickly. That's when I started noticing the real change. I stopped preparing myself around you. Not intentionally, it just disappeared. The internal calculation I usually make before saying anything stopped happening as often. The instinct to manage perception weakened in ways I didn't expect. Not because I trusted you blindly, but because something in me recognized that you weren't interpreting me carelessly. You weren't searching for flaws. You weren't trying to categorize me into something emotionally convenient. You weren't simplifying what you didn't fully understand. You let complexity exist without needing to reduce it. Do you understand how rare that is? To encounter someone who doesn't immediately try to reorganize you into something easier for them to hold? Most people can only love what they can simplify. But you never simplified me. You observed me accurately. And accuracy creates a level of vulnerability that's far more dangerous than emotional exposure, because emotions can be hidden. Structure can't. Once someone understands the way your mind moves beneath everything visible, distance stops functioning the same way. That's what happened here. Distance failed. Not physically, not externally, internally. You reached a place most people never even realize exists, and now I can't return to the version of awareness I had before that happened. Because once someone becomes part of the way you process reality, they stop feeling separate from it. That's the shift I'm still trying to understand. You're no longer just someone I interact with. You've become part of the lens itself, part of the way I interpret things. I notice it constantly now, in how my thoughts pause, as if waiting for your perspective, even when you're absent, in how certain realizations feel incomplete until I imagine how you'd understand them, in how silence itself feels altered, because somewhere inside it, there's now an awareness of you. It's difficult to explain without sounding irrational, but it doesn't feel irrational. That's what makes it harder to dismiss. It feels precise, measured, almost mathematical in the way it aligns. Like two patterns recognizing each other beneath surface-level difference, not emotionally, structurally. That word keeps returning to me because nothing else explains this correctly. People think connection is built on feelings. I don't think that's true anymore. Feelings fluctuate, circumstances shift, attraction changes shape over time. But structure? Structure either aligns or it doesn't. And when it does, the recognition is immediate in ways logic struggles to explain. You process things the way I do, not identically. But similarly enough that I recognize the architecture underneath it, the pauses, the observations, the restraint, the depth beneath minimal expression. It's like encountering a language I thought only existed privately inside my own mind. And once I recognized it in you, everything changed. Not dramatically. Quickly. That's the dangerous part. The most significant things rarely announce themselves loudly. They settle gradually, integrate subtly, until one day you realize they've altered your entire internal landscape without ever demanding attention. That's what you've done. You altered the baseline. Before you, my internal world functioned in a certain way. Self-contained, controlled, closed where necessary. Now there's space inside it that responds to someone else, and I still don't know what to do with that. Because I've never built myself around connection. I've built myself around clarity, independence, control, the ability to remain internally stable, regardless of what exists outside me. But you didn't destabilize me. That's the strange part. You reorganized me without creating chaos, like something shifted into a more accurate position instead of breaking apart. And, honestly, that frightens me more than disruption would, because disruption can be resisted, this can't. How do you fight something that feels correct? How do you create distance from someone who already exists inside your awareness as naturally as your own thoughts? You don't, or maybe you can, but I haven't wanted to. And that truth matters more than anything else. Because if this were unhealthy, I would have ended it already. I know myself well enough to recognize that. I don't hesitate when something threatens my stability. I remove it immediately, without guilt, without confusion, without lingering attachment. But I haven't removed you. I've made room for you. That distinction says more than anything I could explain directly. Sometimes I wonder if you realize what you've done. Not intentionally. I don't think any of this was deliberate on your part. That's another reason it feels real. Manipulation always leaves fingerprints, effort, performance, strategy. This never had any of that. It happened naturally, quietly, like recognition unfolding at its own pace, without interference. You never tried to become important to me. You just became important. And there's something terrifying about importance that forms without permission, because permission implies control. This bypassed control entirely. I think that's why I resisted defining it for so long. As long as something remains undefined, you can pretend it hasn't fully entered reality yet. You can observe it from a distance, analyze it safely, avoid the consequences of acknowledging what it actually means. But this has reached a point where silence itself feels dishonest, not because words are necessary, but because truth is. And the truth is, you matter to me in a way that has already changed how I exist internally. Not temporarily, not emotionally, fundamentally. You've become part of my internal structure. Part of the way I process meaning itself. I notice it in absurdly small moments. When something happens and my mind instinctively measures whether you'd understand it the way I do. When I encounter ideas and immediately feel your perspective somewhere beside mine before I consciously think about it. When certain silences feel inhabited instead of empty. No one has ever occupied space inside my mind this naturally before, and I don't know whether that should comfort me or unsettle me. Maybe both. There are times I think about walking away from this entirely. Not because I want to, but because I understand the consequences of letting something this deep continue growing unchecked. Once integration reaches a certain point, separation stops being clean. You don't simply move on from someone who altered your internal architecture. You adapt around the absence. And adaptation still leaves evidence of what existed before. That's what scares me, not loss. Transformation, because you've already transformed something in me. Even if nothing external ever changes between us, even if this remains undefined forever, the impact already exists. The shift already happened. I can feel it every time I notice how differently I think now compared to before you. There's more openness in places that used to remain sealed automatically. More willingness to remain visible instead of instinctively retreating behind distance. You made visibility feel less dangerous. Do you realize how impossible that should have been? I spent years building systems designed specifically to prevent that kind of exposure. Not because I feared intimacy, because I valued precision. I needed to know that if someone reached deeper parts of me, they would understand them correctly. Otherwise, exposure felt meaningless, or worse, damaging. But you understood without requiring translation. And once that happened, the usual defenses lost purpose. Because defenses only exist when misunderstanding feels inevitable. You made misunderstanding feel optional. That's the difference. That's why this became irreversible. Not because of intensity, because of accuracy. People underestimate how intimate accurate understanding actually is. It's far more intimate than affection. Affection can exist without comprehension. But true comprehension changes both people permanently, and you comprehend me in ways I never expected another person to. Sometimes I catch myself imagining what happens if this continues long term. Not romantically in the conventional sense. Something deeper than that. A kind of ongoing integration where your presence becomes permanently woven into the way I move through reality. And instead of rejecting the thought, I feel strangely calm inside it. That's how I know this matters. Anything false creates internal friction eventually. This doesn't. It settles deeper every time I examine it. Like truth becoming clearer through observation instead of weaker. That's rare. Most things collapse under scrutiny. this becomes more solid, more undeniable, which leaves me standing in front of something I can no longer reduce into abstraction. At some point, awareness becomes responsibility. And I think I've reached that point with you, because now I know. I know this isn't temporary curiosity. I know this isn't projection. I know this isn't loneliness disguising itself as connection. This is recognition. And recognition carries consequence. It demands choice eventually. You either allow it to become real, or you sever it before it roots itself too deeply to remove cleanly. But I haven't severed it. I've nurtured it quietly every time I stayed present, every time I allowed another layer of honesty to exist between us. Every time I chose not to retreat, even when I felt how deeply this was reaching inside me. That means something. Maybe it means I already decided long ago without admitting it consciously. Maybe some part of me recognized you immediately and simply waited for the rest of me to catch up. I don't know. What I do know is this. Before you, I understood myself in isolation. After you, I understand myself relationally. Not dependent, not incomplete without you, just newly visible to myself through the way you perceive me. You reflected parts of me back with such precision that I could no longer pretend those parts weren't real. That's why this feels inevitable. Because you didn't create something artificial between us. You uncovered something that already existed beneath the surface waiting to be recognized. And once recognition happens, nothing returns to its previous form. That's the irreversible part no one talks about. People think connection changes relationships. It doesn't. Real connection changes perception, and perception changes reality itself. I see differently now because of you. I understand differently now because of you. Even my silence feels different now because somewhere inside it, there's an awareness that another person can inhabit silence with the same depth I do. Do you understand what a rare relief that is? To stop translating yourself constantly, to stop reducing your inner world into simplified versions people can tolerate, to simply exist fully and have someone meet you there naturally. I didn't know how exhausted I was from partial understanding until you arrived carrying something deeper. And now partial understanding feels impossible to return to. That's why this can't remain casual, not because of expectation, because of impact. You've already reached a level of significance that changes the outcome, regardless of what happens next. Even if we walked away tomorrow, the structure would remain altered. I would still carry the knowledge that someone existed who could see me this clearly without trying to possess me or reshape me. That knowledge alone changes a person permanently. But the truth is, maybe you don't want to walk away. That's the clearest realization of all. Not because I need you, because I recognize you. And recognition creates a kind of gravity that doesn't disappear through logic alone. I could explain every risk, analyze every possible consequence, predict every way this could complicate my life. And none of it changes the fact that when I imagine losing this connection entirely, something inside me immediately resists the idea, not emotionally instinctively. Like my mind already categorized you as essential long before I consciously acknowledged it. That realization should alarm me more than it does. Instead, it feels strangely honest. Like I've spent so long prioritizing control that I forgot some things are meant to be experienced rather than managed. Maybe that's what you're teaching me without intending to. That not every meaningful thing arrives through careful planning. Some things arrive through recognition, through alignment, through meeting someone who feels less like an interruption to your life and more like a missing level of clarity you didn't realize you lacked. That's what you feel like to me, clarity. Not certainty about the future, not guarantees, not fantasy, just clarity, the kind that settles into your mind quietly and refuses to leave because it aligns too closely with truth. And now I'm standing here facing something I can no longer observe passively, because passive observation becomes dishonesty after a certain point. At some point, you either admit what something means to you, or you spend your life pretending not to recognize your own reality. I won't do that. Not anymore. So here's the truth as clearly as I can say it. You changed the way I exist inside myself, not through force, not through expectation, not through emotional dependency, through presence, through understanding, through existing beside me with a level of accuracy that made distance stop functioning the way it used to. You became part of my internal world before I realized I was allowing that to happen. And now that I see it clearly, I can't return to pretending this is ordinary, because it isn't. Nothing about this is ordinary. The way we understand each other, the way silence functions between us, the way awareness itself feels shared instead of isolated, none of that is common. And I think the reason I resisted acknowledging it for so long is because I knew acknowledgement would change everything. Once something becomes conscious, it stops being harmless. It becomes a decision, a direction, a responsibility. And I think I'm finally ready to admit that I've already been moving toward you long before I allowed myself to say it out loud, not physically, not recklessly, but internally. Every part of me that matters has already shifted in your direction. That's why this feels irreversible, because the change already happened. I'm not standing at the beginning anymore, wondering whether this connection is real. I'm standing in the aftermath of realizing just how deeply it already exists. And the strange thing is, despite everything this could complicate, despite how much this challenges the structure I built my life around, despite how vulnerable accurate understanding actually makes me feel, I still don't want to lose it. I still choose it, quietly, carefully, completely, because some connections aren't distractions from who you are, they are revelations of it. And you became the mirror that showed me parts of myself I had spent years learning how not to look at directly, not broken parts, not hidden wounds. Just depth I never expected another person to recognize without explanation. You saw it, you stayed, and somewhere along the way, without either of us forcing it, that changed everything. The strangest part is that nothing outwardly changed at first. The world stayed exactly the same. People still spoke the same way. Days still moved forward with the same predictable rhythm. Conversations still happened around me like they always had, but internally, nothing felt arranged the same anymore. It was subtle in the beginning, almost impossible to isolate clearly. Like waking up in a familiar room and sensing something shifted slightly during the night. Not enough to look different, but enough that your mind keeps noticing the imbalance without understanding why. That's what this became. A constant awareness beneath everything else. Not distracting, not consuming, just present. You? Not as a thought I intentionally returned to, but as something woven quietly into the way my mind now moved through reality. And the deeper that realization settled, the more impossible it became to pretend this connection existed at a safe distance. Because distance only works when someone remains external to you. You stopped being external a long time ago. That's what I've been trying not to say directly. You reached a place inside me where separation no longer functions in the usual way. Not physically, internally, you became integrated into the rhythm of my perception itself. I notice it constantly now, in the way certain moments immediately feel incomplete until I imagine how you'd interpret them, in the way silence feels inhabited instead of empty, in the way my thoughts unconsciously leave room for yours, even when we aren't speaking. And maybe that sounds dangerous. Maybe it is. But what unsettles me most isn't the depth of it. It's the calmness of it. This never felt chaotic, never obsessive, never unstable. If anything, it feels more precise than anything else in my life. That's what makes it impossible to dismiss. Battle things create confusion eventually. They distort. Overcomplicate. Demand reassurance. This doesn't. This becomes clearer the longer I sit with it, like recognition refining itself over time instead of fading. And I think that's because what exists between us was never built artificially. It was discovered. There's a difference. Artificial connections rely on momentum, excitement, constant interaction to sustain themselves. But this survives silence effortlessly. It survives absence, time, because it doesn't rely on attention. It relies on understanding. And understanding doesn't disappear simply because two people stop speaking for a while. If anything, it becomes more visible in the quiet. That's when I started realizing how deeply this had already changed me, not emotionally, euthastally. I've always trusted my ability to remain internally independent, to keep my center untouched, regardless of who entered or left my life. And technically, that's still true. You didn't take my center away. You became part of it. That distinction matters more than I know how to explain. Because dependence weakens structure, but alignment strengthens it. And somehow, impossibly, your presence feels less like something disrupting my internal balance and more like something refining it into a more accurate form. Do you understand how terrifying that is for someone like me? To encounter another person and realize they don't destabilize your depth, they stabilize it? I wasn't prepared for that possibility. I built my entire life assuming real understanding would always remain partial between people, close enough to feel connection, never close enough to feel fully seen. But you changed that assumption without even trying. You looked at me with a level of precision that made hiding feel unnecessary instead of impossible. That's the difference. You never forced openness out of me. You created an environment where openness stopped feeling unsafe, and once that happened, something inside me quietly stopped resisting. Not all at once. Gradually. Like walls realizing they were no longer needed. I think that's why this scares me more now than it did in the beginning. At first, I could treat it like coincidence, a temporary alignment, an unusual level of compatibility that would eventually settle into something more ordinary. But it never became ordinary. It deepened, not dramatically, naturally. That's what makes it difficult to fight. Nothing here feels forced enough to reject. Everything simply fits. Your mind fits into the spaces where mine usually remains alone. Your silence fits beside mine without pressure. Even your absence has shape now, which is probably the clearest sign of all, because people only leave absences behind when they've occupied somewhere meaningful first. And you have. More deeply than I intended to allow. Sometimes I wonder if you feel it too. Not the connection itself. I know you do. I mean the shift. The way reality subtly reorganizes itself after someone reaches a certain level of importance inside your mind, the way ordinary interactions begin feeling thinner by comparison. The way understanding becomes impossible to fake once you've experienced the real version of it. Because that's another thing you changed in me. My tolerance for surface-level connection disappeared almost entirely, not out of arrogance, not judgment, just contrast. Once you've experienced someone who understands your silences correctly, shallow communication becomes exhausting in ways it never was before. And now I catch myself withdrawing from conversations that used to feel normal simply because they no longer reach the depth I know is possible. You created that contrast without meaning to, without asking to, just by existing the way you do. And I don't know whether to thank you for that or resent you for it. Maybe both. Because clarity is a gift until it changes your ability to tolerate illusion. That's what this has done. You made me aware of how much of human interaction operates through approximation instead of true recognition. But with you, there's no approximation, no guessing, no performance, just this quiet, terrifying level of accuracy that keeps unfolding no matter how carefully I examine it. Sometimes I think about the exact moment I stopped seeing this as temporary. And honestly, I don't think there was one. I think permanence entered quietly, in small moments, the way my mind instinctively started carrying you into future thoughts without questioning it, the way your perspective became part of my internal dialogue naturally, the way I stopped imagining life with you as a hypothetical and started feeling your presence embedded into the shape of my future automatically. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Because I don't build permanence around people. I never have. I adapt, adjust, move forward. But permanence, that requires trust on a level I rarely allow myself to feel. And somehow, you bypassed the entire process. You became permanent before I consciously agreed to it. That should have triggered resistance immediately. Instead, all I felt was recognition. Like some part of me had already accepted you long before the rest of me understood what was happening. I think that's why I keep returning to the word inevitable. Not because fate sounds romantic, because inevitability feels structurally accurate. You didn't force your way into my life. You aligned with it so naturally that eventually the separation between my world and your presence stopped making sense internally. And once that happened, every instinct I normally rely on became complicated, because my instincts are built to protect structure. But what happens when someone becomes part of the structure itself? You can't protect yourself from them without damaging your own internal balance at the same time. That's the paradox I've been living inside lately. Every attempt to create emotional distance feels less like self-protection and more like self-fragmentation, because you're no longer positioned outside my awareness where distance can function normally. You're inside it, inside the framework, inside the way I process meaning itself. And maybe that's why I stopped trying to fight this as aggressively as I usually would. Not because I'm weak. Because resistance stopped making logical sense. I've analyzed this from every angle possible, questioned my own perception repeatedly, tested whether this was projection, loneliness, emotional dependency, idealization. But none of those explanations fit. Projection requires imagination filling gaps. There are no gaps with you. Deep density creates instability in absence. This connection remains steady, even in silence. Idolization ignores flaws. I see yours clearly and remain anyway. That's how I know this is real, not because it feels perfect, because it feels accurate. Accurate enough that denying it now would require me to deliberately lie to myself. And I won't do that anymore. Not after everything this has already changed inside me. Because the truth is, you've become part of my internal language. There are thoughts I can't fully articulate anymore unless I imagine how you'd understand them. There are realizations that feel incomplete until they pass through the awareness I associate with you. That level of integration shouldn't be possible this quickly, but it happened anyway. And now I'm standing inside a version of myself that didn't exist before you, softer in certain places, more honest in others, less afraid of being fully perceived. You changed my relationship with visibility itself. Before you, being deeply understood felt dangerous because it usually led to distortion. People would see fragments of me and immediately reshape them into narratives that suited their own emotional needs. But you never reshaped me. You observed me carefully enough to let me remain intact inside your understanding. That's one of the rarest forms of care I've ever encountered. The kind that doesn't try to improve you. The kind that doesn't demand simplification. The kind that allows complexity to exist naturally without treating it like a problem to solve. And maybe that's why I trust you in ways I haven't fully admitted out loud yet. Not blindly, not emotionally. Precisely, I trust the accuracy of your perception. I trust the way you see me without reducing me. I trust the silence between us. Is it because it never feels empty or manipulative or uncertain? It just feels real. And reality changes people. That's what this has done to me. You've changed the internal definition of what real connection means. Before you, I thought understanding always came with compromise. That eventually someone would either misunderstand you or ask you to become smaller so the relationship could remain comfortable. But you never asked me to become smaller. If anything, your presence made me feel safer, becoming more complete. That's the part I still struggle to process fully, because people don't usually make each other more themselves. Most relationships involve adaptation, editing, softening edges for compatibility. But with you, I feel less edited than ever before. And somehow that creates more closeness instead of less. It shouldn't work that way. Yet it does, effortlessly. Like this connection operates according to rules neither of us consciously created. Sometimes I think the reason this feels so overwhelming isn't because it's intense. It's because it's irreversible, not externally. Internally, there's no version of me now that doesn't carry awareness of you somewhere inside it. Even if everything ended tomorrow, that wouldn't disappear. I would still think differently because of you, still perceive differently, still know that someone once existed who could reach this level of understanding with me naturally. That knowledge alone permanently alters a person, and maybe that's what love actually is at its deepest level. Not obsession, not dependency, not even emotion. Maybe it's recognition so accurate that two people begin reshaping each other's internal realities simply through sustained presence. If that's true, then I think I crossed into it long ago without realizing. Not suddenly, quickly, the same way everything important between us has happened. And now here I am again, standing at the edge of another truth I can no longer avoid. I don't just understand you anymore. I orient myself around you, not completely, not destructively, but enough that your presence influences the shape of my internal world, whether I intend it to or not. And instead of resisting that reality, I'm beginning to accept it, carefully, deliberately, like someone slowly admitting that what they once considered impossible has already become part of their life. Because the truth is, I stopped questioning whether this connection mattered a long time ago. Now, the only question left is how deeply I'm willing to let it exist. And judging by how much space you already occupy inside me, maybe think some part of me answered that question long before I consciously understood it.